Hello again. We are, all of us, I think, thoroughly familiar these days with the concept of hate speech. That is to say, unpleasant, offensive, or threatening language directed against people because of innate characteristics such as skin colour, gender, sexuality, or nationality. Of course, the act of saying horrible or hurtful things about such groups did not begin in the 1960s. It has been around since the dawn of time. It was not until 1968, though, that people came up with the idea of setting out precisely what constitutes our modern idea of hate speech. Certainly, before that time, there have been no specific laws which prohibit people from being derogatory or insulting about people solely because they belong to particular large groups, such as black people, women, or Muslims. The first law, which outlined what we now understand to be the essence of hate speech, was the American Civil Rights Act of 1968, which made it a federal crime for anybody who willingly injures, intimidates, or interferes with another person, or attempts to do so by force because of the other person's race, colour, religion, or national origin. Note that this covers intimidation, that is to say, spoken words which cause distress or fear directed towards somebody because of their inherent characteristics. I give a link to the Wikipedia article on the Civil Rights Act in the description to this video. President Johnson introduced this legislation to tackle the situation faced by African Americans, of course, particularly those living in the so-called Deep South. Black people who wished to vote, for instance, were sometimes threatened to prevent them from registering to vote, so the clause about intimidation was very necessary. It is far from clear, though, that a law introduced in one country to tackle a specific situation should have been adopted by other countries as a general principle. But that is, of course, what has happened. It is why we in Britain today are liable to face prosecution if we say the wrong things about people because of their nationality, sexuality, gender, disability, ethnicity, and so on. It is why a wide-ranging law is about to be passed in the Republic of Ireland, which is designed to deal with hate speech. The question is, are such laws really needed as a general thing in all countries and at all times? We in Britain used to get along well enough before the idea of hate speech was dreamed up and made an offence. Insulting behaviour liable to cause a breach of the peace has been a criminal offence in this country for a long while, and in its present form since 1936. The Public Order Act, passed that year, designed to deal with Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists, says that any person who in any public place or at any public meeting uses threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behaviour with intent to provoke a breach of the peace or whereby a breach of the peace is likely to be occasioned shall be guilty of an offence. I give a link to the 1936 Public Order Act in the description to this video. This act really seems to cover all that is necessary. If I use insulting or abusive words to somebody in public and it looks as though a breach of the peace might ensue, that is a crime. That covers quite adequately what most of us mean by hate speech. If I start hurling abuse at Muslims in the street or calling people by offensive racial slurs, the 1936 Act is enough to see me arrested. Together with one or two older pieces of legislation, it means that anybody who is likely to cause trouble by being rude or offensive about other people is committing a crime. For most of us, I think, preventing disorder and violence caused by intemperate language is probably as far as the law needs to go. It is not at all clear why it should be an offence to say unpleasant things which are not likely to provoke trouble and are merely upsetting to this or that person. that's another thing entirely. The 1968 Civil Rights Act introduced the same distinction, of course. It became an offence to intimidate a person with words or to threaten or interfere with somebody on the grounds of race, but it was not made illegal to say horrible and hurtful things. This is where I think personally the law has taken a step too far. It is very right and proper that I should be forbidden by law from menacing or insulting somebody simply because that individual is black or homosexual or a woman. It is also right that it should be illegal for me to provoke trouble in public by shouting insults at people based on their religion, ethnicity, and so on. But is it really necessary that it should be against the law to say unpleasant things generally about this or that group? That is to say, to express a negative or contemptuous opinion about, say, homosexuals or Muslims. This is unlikely to intimidate anybody, nor will it provoke a breach of the peace. It may well be an unpleasant thing to do, and indeed it is, and I'm sure that homosexuals or Muslims would be distressed or hurt by such an action. But should it really be against the law? Should the law step in to prevent people and protect them from being offended by the opinions expressed by others, even if those opinions are ill-founded, untrue or unpleasant? This is how the idea of hate speech has mutated over the last 50 years or so, from a perfectly sensible and proportionate response to a crisis in one country, the United States, to a general principle across the Western world that nobody must ever become upset by being insulted or despised because of who they are.